In any C++ program, input and output are crucial. The user cannot work without the program, and vice versa. The program's job is to tell the user what to do and work around with the variables that have been determined and entered by the user. The user's job is to give those values and assign values to the variables for the program to play around with. Let's analyze this program that we have already gone through in one of the previous videos. To recap, it's a program that calculates how much pay you receive on a weekly basis based on a fixed rate of pay and the number of hours you work in that week, both of which have been determined by the user. This first line of code, which we have gone through in the previous video about variables, is the declaration for 3 variables, all of which are floating point variables and thus declared with the variable double. We have hours, which are entered by the user, representing the number of hours that the user has worked in a week. The rate of pay, also entered by the user, which is a fixed value. And lastly, the total pay received by the user. It is calculated based on the hours worked and the rate of pay entered as per earlier. These first 4 lines of code both contain instructions that are printed by the program to tell the user what to do, as well as a prompt for the user to enter said values, to assign values to those variables to be counted by the program. These first 2 lines deal with the hour variable, telling the user to enter the number of hours worked in 1 week. Cout is the command for output, and cin is the command for input, and leaves a space for the user to enter the value of hours to be assigned to the variable double hours. The next 2 lines of code function in a similar fashion, except this time they deal with the rate of pay, which are also entered by the user, but first the program, upon instructions, prompts the user to enter the rate of pay. The user enters the rate of pay when this prompt is triggered. cin is the input command and cout is the output command. Remember that all lines of code should be closed out with a semicolon. There are some conditions where we don't need to put it, but it will be covered in later videos. We will also be covering equations and mathematical operators among other things in the next few videos, so we will not look at this line of code for this video. Lastly, there is one last output command, which tells the program to output this text alongside the final calculated variable of pay received by the user. We then have a line telling the program, once it is finished accomplishing all of its instructions, it shall return a value of 0, ending the executable file. Let's go ahead and design our own program. This program will allow us to enter text of any kind and return that text to us. As with any C++ program, we are first going to include the input and output header file, IOStream. And because we're dealing with strings of text, we are going to include the header file for string variables too. I have forgotten to mention this in the previous video, but I have attached captions to cover that error. We then follow up with the using namespace standard, and then initialize the main console with a double bracket and curly braces where we will be typing our code. The first thing we need to do is declare the variable that the program can play around with. So let's initialize a string variable and let's call it word. Then the program needs to tell the user what to do. So let's go ahead and use an output command. For output commands, it is immediately followed by 2 arrows pointing inward, followed by the text. Remember that for strings of text, you need to use double quotes. So let's go ahead and tell the program to print the instructions for the user. Please enter a word or text, and then initialize it with a semicolon. We then need to leave a prompt for the user to enter their values to be assigned to that variable. The cin command is then followed by 2 outward facing arrows, followed by the variable the user needs to enter values for. We also close it with a semicolon. Lastly, since we want the program to return that string of text to us, we again use the output command and enter a string of text that the program will print, followed by the variable, so that it may print the value from that variable that we entered earlier. And then close out the program with the return 0 command, closing it out with, as always, a semicolon. Now there's a few things of note here. The first is that I left a space after this string of text here that the program will print, and that's because I want to leave a space before the program prints the value held by this variable. Something similar can also be done with input prompts after output. Normally, what the program will do is, it will immediately prompt you to enter a value for the variable after it finishes printing the instructions. If you wish to leave a line after the instructions, all you need to do is one of two methods. The first is, you may enter another set of inward-facing arrows followed by an end line command, endl. You may see something similar to this also happening in the last line of code in the payment program. This tells the program to essentially leave one line after printing the prompted text. Another way to accomplish this is by entering a rightward slash, not to be confused with the leftward slash, followed by the letter n. These two, the /n and the endl code, both serve the same purpose, which is to ask the program to leave a line after printing a prompted text. If you wish for your program to look a little neater, I suggest you do this every time you deal with output and input immediately after. To prove that this program works, let's go ahead and initialize it. Let's press compile and run. And as I mentioned earlier, the prompt will instead move from beside the colon to below it, left one line. So now I will enter a word, for example, strong. And as you can see, we told the program to print a line for us, followed by the value held by the variable. And that is what makes this program work. We now have a program that successfully takes the text that we enter and prints it out in turn. So as you can see, the possibilities are endless, and it only ends with your imagination. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next video.